And we are back here on Boles.tv, Boles.tv, television, hey, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern. Well, we've been talking about Magnus Carlsen and his wild success as the world champion of chess for the past 5 years, and his want not to defend his title, with Nepo and Ding now going to play for the championship. And an interesting thing about Magnus is this idea that has been surrounding him, swirling around him for a long time, is the question about him being on the spectrum. Is he autistic? Does he have Asperger's? And even asking that question really makes a lot of people uncomfortable, saying it's none of our business. And perhaps it's not, but there's been a lot of speculation about it online, and even Magnus has addressed it and then not addressed it and then sort of addressed it. That makes it an opportunity to have a conversation, which is really all we're seeking to do here. And there are people who want Magnus to be on the spectrum because it's important to have people to be role models and examples of excellence in dealing with being on the spectrum. It's sort of the same idea of some radicals, militants in the gay community who want these closeted and hidden actors, superstars, politicians to come out of the closet and say, I am a gay man, I am a gay female, and this is my life. Take it or leave it, it's who I am. Because that normalizes what has been restricted and tainted by a society that does not understand. And then you sort of understand why these celebrities, who are well known in the gay community, do not want to come out and say anything officially because they know what's going to happen. It's not going to be a great coming out party. It's going to be a major backlash, probably, from people saying, oh, no, you lied to us all these years. We asked you if you were gay. We asked you if you were in love with a man, if you were in love with a woman. And you said, no, you're two-faced. You get nothing. And that was the problem with old-time Hollywood, is in their communities, in their groups, they were able to be themselves. But in the tabloids, if you're Rock Hudson, you had to marry your publicist. So you didn't look gay. So when we talk about Magnus Carlsen and his absolute genius, there are some people who want him to share who he really is. And some of the rumors that go around that have been verified, not verified, are he lives at home with his parents. I believe he's in his 30s, late 20s. That every morning at a very specific time, his parents go to his bedroom, wake him up with a glass of orange juice. May not sound odd or strange, but for people, as I understand it, who have experience with people on the spectrum, that they like structure, they like predictability, they like things on a schedule. And to keep them centered and focused, you do that for them. And chess is a very intensive mind game in your own mind and in the minds of others. And there are some people in the community who say, my goodness, can you imagine what this would do for Asperger's or autism if Magnus Carlsen said, hey, I'm the world champion and I have little bit I'm on the spectrum. It would be illuminating. It would be refreshing. But there is shame in that, appears, for anyone to come out and say, well, my genius in chess is not because of me or my mind, it's because of this thing I have on the spectrum, which allows me to concentrate and see things that other people can't see. Well, that is the meaning of genius. And over the years, we've had geniuses on the spectrum who may not have even known that they were on the spectrum. And I remember seeing, if you have any exposure, even a minimal exposure to people who have autism or Asperger's, you know to recognize some of the behaviors. And if you watch the video of Magnus Carlsen walking, he has a very interesting gait where his hips are kind of turned in as he walks. It doesn't look like an average walk. Take that or leave it. In early games, using the clock, there are videos of him tapping the clock, because when you make a move, you tap the clock to stop your clock, and the other person's clock starts ticking. And there was one particular game where you're watching, Magnus play, and then you see him turn off his clock, and you think, wow, just that one little move is very telling. And most people, let's say this is your clock, you tap your clock, and the next person moves. And in this bit of video, I saw Magnus tap his clock this way with his hand this way. And it went like that. Now, most people don't tap a flat surface. You would make your hand flat to tap the surface. You would not raise your hand like that to tap the surface. It was very interesting and just a little bit of a possible sign, a tell. He doesn't do that anymore. Now you see him and he taps it the average way. But just the arm movement was different, and the way he tapped the button was very different. And then you go and you do a little bit of research. And the first thing that you know recently, which I admire, I think the guy is a little strange, but Elon Musk has opened up. He said, hey, look, I have Asperger's. I'm a little odd. I'm a little strange. I don't know if it's the source of my genius or not. April 15, 2022, gave an interview about Asperger's and how it's affected his life. Hey, Gordon says, isn't it a tiny button on the clock? I would think a finger would suffice. A moment. Okay, a little bit dusty, a little bit hidden. So this is a chess clock. This is what they look like. It's a big, huge button. I should have used this for my demonstration. So most of it's right there. So when you're done, you just tap it, and it's done. It's very soft. You don't go like this with the hand raised. You can. For people with exposure to people on the spectrum, it says, I've seen that before. So, hey, Gordon says, those are much newer than the ones I've seen in older photos. I can see tippy tapping with one finger, though. Yeah, they're very nice. And the old one with the old clocks, they don't use those anymore. They use these, and they're tied to the chessboard, so they can sometimes see the moves that you're making. It's all computerized now. It's beautifully done. So that's weird, because a flat surface, you want to make sure you're hitting it. You wouldn't want to hit it with these knuckles. So So Elon has come out and said, look, I have Asperger's. Now, was there any uproar? Did some people say, now I understand. He's not really a genius. It's his Asperger's. No, the reaction was kind of like, oh, okay. We kind of suspected that based on some of your behavior. It's an invisible disability. And there's nothing wrong with being on the spectrum. And that is the point I'm trying to make in this conversation about Magnus is, can you imagine what this would do for kids on the spectrum? For people with Asperger's, for Magnus to say, oh, by the way, I just happen to have a little touch of something, whatever it is. And he has sort of said that, but we'll get to that in a minute. Most adults with invisible disabilities, such as Asperger's, conceal them professionally to avoid stigmas and potential discrimination. Well, you're the world champion. Do you really want people to know that about you? And then people are going to make fun of him and say, oh, he's not a genius. It's his Asperger's that makes him a genius. Growing up, the social cues were not intuitive, Musk said. When asked about it on a TED conference, I would just tend to take things very literally. But then that turned out to be wrong. People were not simply saying exactly what they mean. There are all sorts of other things that are meant. And it took me a while to figure that out. And you can kind of see that in the way he deals with the world. He's in his own mind many times, even when he's speaking to you, which is fine. I remember we were talking about Donald Trump's son, Barron. And for a while, there was speculation on the internet that Barron was on the autism scale. And Trump talked about you have to take a little baby, you're going to vaccinate him, the baby comes home and has autism. Gordon says, I often struggle to understand what people mean and have a hard time getting when people are being sarcastic or joking. Well, there you go. That's very interesting. It doesn't mean you have Asperger's. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Who knows? And there was outrage that Barron Trump was being accused of being on the autism scale, even though Trump had been talking about it. And Rosie O'Donnell came out and said something about that. Oh, well, I have kids who have autism and Asperger's, and, I see a lot of that behavior in Barron Trump. And man, she got creamed in the media. How dare you pick on a child? All the ridiculous stuff. And I just happened to reply to her and said one sentence. There's nothing wrong with being on the spectrum. And Rosie O'Donnell followed me back, and I followed her, and the rest is history. So she got slammed for telling the truth as she knew it. And I understand, Barron has a private life, but you watch him when he is in public. He's very tall now, doesn't really make eye contact, always appears a little out of sorts. And can you imagine how much good it would do if someone like that would come out and say, hey, it's not a big deal, but I'm just letting you know. Just like Elon did. It's not a big deal, but these are some of the problems that I have in my life. And I'm not making an excuse, but I have Asperger's. And Musk says, I found it rewarding to spend all night programming computers just by myself. But I think that is not normal. He also said becoming obsessed with physics and trying to figure out the meaning of life. My driving philosophy is to expand the scope and scale of consciousness so we may better understand nature and the universe. The big picture, this article says, Asperger's and other similar disorders that were previously diagnosed separately are now part of a wide diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. And there are roughly 1.5 million people with ASD. They're expected to reach adulthood in the next decade. So it's good that people are not feeling they have to hide what some people label as a disability. So then you go to the Google. Magnus Carlsen, autism. And look at what you get. Many years ago, someone actually asked me, says Magnus, if I suffered from autism. I thought the question was stupid. So I replied, well, isn't that obvious? That was silly. I'm obviously not suffering from autism. Later, I realized that not everyone shares that view, and I probably shouldn't have made that thoughtless remark. Yeah, the problem is the word suffering. Just because you are on the spectrum, or because you have autism or Asperger's, does not mean you are suffering or a lesser person. And here are all the links talking about the boy genius and his behavior. And the most interesting one is this Quora conversation. Gordon says, I'm not suffering from autism. I'm rather enjoying it. Could have been a rather amusing reply. I agree, but that would have meant he was admitting that he has it, and he doesn't want to have it. He doesn't want that to be, because people will say that's the reason why he's a genius. It's because of his disability, not because of who he is as a person. But the problem is, Magnus, it's one and the same. You are who you are. So here's this big conversation on Quora. Is Magnus Carlsen autistic? Well, isn't that obvious? In a December 2013 interview with Norwegian tabloid, he clarified he had meant obviously not, and that he considers himself to have normal social skills and to be functioned normally. Now, would you say that if you were not perhaps on the spectrum? Why would you say, I consider myself to have normal social skills and to be functioning normally? The people who are functioning normally do not phrase it that way. It sounds like a canned and a practiced reply. In the summer of 2014, I had the opportunity to sit across from Magnus. Hey, Gordon says, to circle back the thing about actors staying in the closet, some people are concerned that they want to be known for their acting ability and not for what they do in terms of sexuality. Very true. You don't ask about Tom Hanks's sex life and say, oh, he's great because he's straight. That's a point. But there are other people who take advantage of their sexuality to either get ahead or to control other people or to, have a fake boyfriend and say, oh, this is the love of my life for 20 years, where, everyone knows that you bought your girlfriend an apartment in New York and you pay for her living expenses. Hey, Gordon also says, it's a bit like this Magnus thing. He wants to be known as a chess player, Magnus, not on the spectrum chess player, Magnus. Right. And I say to Magnus, what does it matter? You are who you are. And if you're hiding part of you because you're ashamed of it, that's a problem. In the summer of 2014, I had the opportunity to sit across from Magnus at dinner and chat with him extensively. I'm in no way a professional psychologist or similar, but I can nevertheless say with some confidence that he is not, in fact, autistic. He has normal social skills and functions normally in situations. And then this person goes on to say, hey, I've also met Gary Kasparov several times, and I'd say the same of him, not autistic. He is quite intense, but he takes chess very seriously. And then another person says, in the history of chess, there have been many top players that have been in the autism spectrum, most notably Bobby Fischer. And if you've seen and watched and observed Bobby Fischer, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Currently, Czech Grandmaster David Navarra seems to fall in that category as well, but as far as I know, it's still unconfirmed. However, Magnus Carlsen, while impatient at times and occasionally appearing socially awkward, but in the light of massive tension and security, hardly a surprise, Magnus is most definitely not on the spectrum. And then here we go. This is the one you're going to see from 3 years ago that gets copied and pasted into Reddit. This is the original. Give it. Yes, Magnus Carlsen is high on the autism spectrum. It is curious how many here who know nothing about autism are declaring him innocent, as if autism is the worst thing in the world for him to have. Many people that were thought to be strange or socially abnormal 40 years ago, when I was a kid, we now realize are on the autism spectrum. And their strangeness is explained by common autism characteristics. As someone who teaches many special needs children, here are the autistic traits I noticed with Magnus Carlsen. No eye contact. Doesn't like to be touched. Responds to social interactions but does not initiate them. Does not generally share observations or experiences with others. Difficulty understanding jokes, figures of speech, or sarcasm. Difficulty reading facial expressions and body language. Difficulty understanding the rules of conversation. Difficulty understanding group interactions. Aversion to answering questions about themselves. Gives spontaneous comments which seem to have no connection to the current conversation. Makes honest but inappropriate observations. Seems unable to understand another person's feelings. Prefers to be alone, aloof, or overly friendly. Difficult maintaining friendships. Unaware, disinterested in what is going on around them. Talks excessively about one or two topics, dinosaurs, movies, whatever. Overly trusting or unable to read the motives behind people's actions. Minimal acknowledgement of others. Abnormal use of pitch, intonation, rhythm, or stress while speaking. Speech is abnormally loud or quiet. Obsessions with objects, ideas, desires. Ritualistic, compulsive behavior patterns. Sniffing, licking, watching objects fall, flapping arms, spinning, rocking, humming, tapping. Fascination with rotation. Play is repetitive. Unusual attachment to objects. Difficulty transferring skills from one area to another. Frustration is expressed in unusual ways. Gross motor skills are developmentally behind peers, riding a bike, skating, running. Fine motor skills are developmentally behind peers, handwriting, tying shoes, scissors. Inability to perceive potentially dangerous situations. Extreme fearophobia for no apparent reason. Verbal outbursts. Unexpected movements, running into the street. Difficulty sensing time, knowing how long 10 minutes is, or 3 days, or a week. Difficulty waiting their turn. Causes injury to self. Sensitivity or lack of sensitivity to sounds, textures, and touches, light, and smell. Desires comfort items, blankets, teddy bear, rocks. Laughs, cries, or throws a tantrum for no apparent reason. Resists change in the environmental. An emotional incident can determine the mood for the day. Emotions can pass very suddenly or drawn out for a long period of time. Becomes overwhelmed with too much verbal direction. Tends to either tune out or break down when being reprimanded. Calmed by external situations. Soothing sounds, brushing, rotating object, constant pressure. Gordon says, by his teddy bear he still has from childhood, sitting on the couch next to him nervously. You need to be left alone to release tension and frustration. Exceptionally high skills in some areas and very low in others. Difficulty with reading comprehension. Can quote an answer but can't predict, summarize, or find symbolism. Difficulty with fine motor skills, coloring, printing, scissors, and gluing. Short attention span for most lessons. Resistance or inability to follow directions. Difficulty transitioning from one activity to another in school. Walks on toes. Unusual gait. Difficulty changing from one floor surface to another, carpet to wood, sidewalk to grass. Odd or unnatural posture, rigid or floppy. Difficulty moving through space, bumps into objects or people. Walks without swinging arms freely. There are a lot of Magnus videos out there that make fun of his walk, and they're doing it very viciously, and they think it's funny. But if you watch them, it's a curious thing to see. Appearance of hearing problems, but hearing has been checked and is fine. Apparent lack of concern for personal hygiene, hair, teeth, body odors. From the very first interviews I saw with Carlsen 11 years ago, he did not speak the way a 150 IQ plus person is expected to talk. He spoke slowly in strange patterns, unusual intonations, making bizarre facial expressions, seemingly not understanding the rules of social interaction or how to express yourself. Socially, his verbal acuity appeared to be very low, perhaps at a social IQ of around 85. The autistic traits he demonstrates have nothing to do with being introverted. The way his mouth hangs agape often is typical for people not socially aware of how they look, acting unconsciously in strange ways. Carlsen has frequent outbursts, makes bizarre facial expressions, and communicates in abnormal and unpredictable ways, even in Norwegian. He is aloof, unfriendly, obsessed with objects, and needs routine in everything he does. He has trouble understanding humor and feels uncomfortable in new situations, which are both the opposite of the way nearly all intelligent non-autistic people are. This is why he lives at home, even into his late 20s, with his parents still bringing him orange juice every morning. He resists changes in his life and essentially lives like a big child. Gordon says, try not to self-diagnose. And finally, this Quora article continues. He lives in his own world. This is part of the literal definition of the term aut and ism conjoined, and doesn't like people stepping into it. Those here should stop pretending that autism is some unknown thing that no one has ever diagnosed or knows anything about. The characteristics I mentioned above are well known in mental health literature. Magnus Carlsen is clearly high on the autism spectrum. So you can take that or leave that. But it's a very interesting conversation to have. I remember when he was playing Jan, and they had a video of Magnus riding his bike to the site of the game in the last World Championship, parking his bike, getting off of his bike with his backpack, and then sort of half walking, running into the building. And just watching the way that he pedals a bike was very curious. Usually your knees are in line with your feet as you're pedaling. And Magnus's knees were just a little out, so he was sort of pedaling like this. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. And usually when you get off your bike, you get off your bike. And Magnus sort of was doing steps. Very subtly. I'm now parking my bike. I'm now lifting my leg. I'm now lifting my leg off of the bike. I am putting my foot down next to my other foot. I'm now standing up. I'm checking my bike is straight and on its own. I'm now standing up. I'm now turning. I'm now beginning to walk. It wasn't that stunted and that dramatically presented, but you could see that it looked a little mechanical. And you've seen Magnus being interviewed, and he's very uncomfortable. He does not really initiate answers. To try to get answers out of him is a lot of work. He doesn't really kid around or joke. And on the stage at the last World Championship, he had Magnus over here kind of sulking in his chair, all down like this. And he was ahead and winning. And on the opposite end of the dais, you have Jan sitting there completely humiliated, smiling and sort of making, jokes about himself, self-deprecating humor. And if you looked at the pictures, Jan, Magnus, who's winning? You would say that Jan is winning. And it was just the opposite. Magnus was crushing him. So is he, isn't he? Does it matter? Does it not matter? These are conversations that some people are having in the world. And I understand people who say, look, Magnus, come out, let us celebrate the genius of who you are across the spectrum. And then I understand that perhaps people like Magnus want to say, look, if I come out and say something like that, people are going to think I'm some sort of fraud or some kind of freak. And I don't want that. And he doesn't really, talk about having a girlfriend or wanting a family or any future plans. It's all just very unspoken, which is all fine. None of it has to mean anything. But when you're just sort of observing behavior and actions, and it makes you wonder if there's something out there that could be shared, a greater facility that would help a lot of people feel better about themselves. But some people are only interested in themselves. They are not interested in other people. They don't want to help. They don't want to be bothered. And that's fine too. But I will finish this thought. What I said to Rosie McDonald. There's nothing wrong with being on the spectrum. Now we're taking a very brief final blood pressure break, returning in a moment.